My neighbor is stalking me. Let me tell you a story about a time things got a little bit creepy in my apartment building. You see, sometimes, people can be a little strange, and sometimes, that strangeness can make you feel uncomfortable. It all started one night when I had a little too much fun out with my friends. You know, the kind of night where the music's pumping, everyone's laughing, and you feel like you could dance forever. Well, that night, I ended up meeting a guy from my building in the hallway. We chatted, and things just sort of happened. Looking back, I realize I wasn't thinking clearly. The next morning, I felt awkward about the whole thing. It felt like one of those moments you'd rather forget, like tripping and spilling your lunch all over yourself in the school cafeteria. I hoped he would feel the same way and just move on. But I guess he had other plans. You know how it is in an apartment building, you run into your neighbors all the time. But it seemed like I was bumping into this neighbor more often than usual. It was almost like he knew exactly when I left for work and when I came back home. He'd always be super friendly, striking up conversations in the hallway. At first, I tried to keep things short and sweet, hoping he'd get the hint that I wasn't interested in anything beyond a quick hello. But he didn't seem to pick up on my subtle cues. Then, he surprised me by sending me a friend request on Facebook. I'll be honest, I totally ignored it, pretending I hadn't seen it. One day, he flat out asked me why I hadn't accepted his friend request. I couldn't avoid the conversation anymore. I decided to be straight with him. Look, I said, that night was fun, but I'm not interested in anything more. I'm just not. I thought I was being clear, but his response surprised me. Okay, cool, we can still be friends, he said, all upbeat and positive. Part of me felt a little bad. Maybe I had been a bit harsh. So, I thought, alright, fine, we can be friends. But then, things got a bit too friendly for my comfort. I'd see him all the time, like he was waiting for me in the hallway. He wasn't shy about asking me all sorts of personal questions about my life and my past boyfriends, stuff that I wouldn't normally share with someone I barely knew. And on Facebook, he liked tons of my pictures. Like, almost every picture. It was pretty obvious, like he was trying to leave little breadcrumbs to get my attention. He also started sending me messages, inviting me to hang out. Now, I don't know about you, but I check out people's profiles on Facebook every now and then, like anyone else. It's natural curiosity, right? But this guy, he was taking it to a whole new level. It was getting a little unnerving, and frankly, a little creepy. One night, during one of our hallway chats, he said something that completely threw me off guard. I love you. He just blurted it out. I totally froze. Because he was standing right there in front of me, practically nose to nose, I decided to just brush it off. Oh, haha, you're funny, I mumbled, trying to lighten the mood. Inside, though, I was freaking out a little. Later, I confided in some of my friends, telling them what had happened and about his weird behavior. He's probably just a bit lonely, they said, trying to reassure me. Just be nice, but be clear about your boundaries. Even though my friends meant well, his persistence just started to feel suffocating. It felt like I couldn't leave my own apartment without running into him, having to talk to him, or seeing him lurking on my Facebook page. I needed to do something. I decided to rip off the band-aid. I deleted and blocked him from Facebook. That felt good, a little victory. Then, of course, I bumped into him in the hallway again. Hey, did you delete your Facebook or something? He asked. I can't find you anymore. There it was. The awkward moment I was trying to avoid. No more subtle hints. It was time to be direct. Look, I said, you seem like a nice guy, but I get the feeling that hanging out with me is giving you the wrong impression. I'm just not interested in anything more than a casual hello in the hallway. His response surprised me. But, we had something special. He protested. It would be awkward to pretend it never happened. We should at least be friends. I stood my ground. I don't want to give you the wrong impression, so I think it's best for both of us if we don't hang out, I stated firmly, and then, before he could reply, I made a beeline for my apartment. Walking away, I felt bad. Really bad, but I knew I had to be firm. He was making me uncomfortable, and it wasn't fair to either of us to continue this charade of friendship when I had no intention of ever having a real friendship with him. For a few days, things were blissfully quiet. I didn't see him in the hallway, and he didn't message me. I thought, maybe this is finally over. Maybe he got the message. Then one evening, I got home late, and there it was, an envelope slipped under my door. An actual letter. Now, who writes letters these days? My stomach did a little flip as I picked it up and saw my name scrawled across the front in his familiar handwriting. My heart started thumping a little faster as I opened the envelope and began to read. Dear, it began, you didn't give me much chance to speak the other night, and there is more I wanted to say, though this might actually be an easier way for me to explain my thoughts and feelings. I know we had only talked a few times before our tryst, but I felt like there was an obvious connection between us. I'm sure you must have felt it too, or I don't think you would have come home with me that night. I'm not the type of guy who sleeps with girls I don't really know, but I was extremely attracted to you, and when it appeared you reciprocated my feelings, I couldn't help myself. When you told me you weren't interested in anything romantic, I understood, even if it was not what I wanted to hear. I don't know anything about your personal life, and of course, I realize why you might not be interested in me. However, I think it is strange you don't at least want to be friends. We shared a very intimate moment with each other, and you can't pretend it never happened. It therefore seems only logical that we become friends. It only makes it more awkward if we aren't. I just want to say, if you feel embarrassed or worried that I think of you as slutty, don't be. I don't judge you, that would be a terrible double standard. Though be careful, because some men may see your behavior as slutty, especially if you refuse to talk to them after. Just like when a guy doesn't call a girl after they sleep together, he's seen as a hole. Really, the point of me saying all this is just to repeat that I understand you are not interested in a relationship with me, and I respect that. However, I am just going to say it, I really like you. You're a fun, smart and beautiful girl, and I would love to get to know you more. I don't think you can deny that we got along very well before that night, and I don't think what happened should change anything. Don't think you're leading me on. I'm a grown guy and I know that no means no, and can handle just being friends with you. But I respect what you said to me, even if it hurt a little, and will keep my distance from you for now. If you change your mind and if you ever want to talk to me or if you need anything, you know where I live, and I will always welcome you. That's what neighbors are for, right? As I finished the letter, a shiver ran down my spine. The way he wrote, the tone of his words, it all felt off. This wasn't a sweet letter from someone with a harmless crush. It felt possessive and controlling, laced with a bitterness that chilled me to the bone. The part where he tried to define how other men might perceive me, warning me about appearing slutty, was particularly unsettling. He was trying to manipulate me, making me question myself and my own choices. The letter confirmed my gut feeling this guy was seriously messed up. I was glad I had taken a stand and been upfront with him, even though it had been incredibly uncomfortable. After that letter, I breathed a sigh of relief when a few days went by without any sign of him. Maybe he finally got the hint and is going to leave me alone, I thought, allowing myself a sliver of hope. Then came Monday. I was unloading some groceries from my car when I heard a voice boom, "Hey, do you need a hand?" It was him, of course. It wasn't a huge deal. It was bound to happen at some point. So, I just gave him a polite nod and said, "Hey, no, I'm fine, thanks." I really didn't need his help, and honestly, I just wanted to avoid any interaction. I thought I was being polite, keeping it brief and neutral, but his reaction caught me totally off guard. He puffed up like an angry bullfrog and snapped, "What's your problem? I'm only trying to help you. All I've ever done is be nice to you, but you still act like a BTCH." He stormed off before I could even stammer a reply, but honestly, I don't know what I would have said. I was totally dumbfounded. It felt like a scene from a bad movie, the kind where everyone around stops and stares while the drama unfolds. Sure, he was allowed to feel hurt or used, especially if he'd developed feelings for me. I understood that, but blowing up like that, in public, it was uncalled for, and frankly, terrifying. He was like a pressure cooker, and I had just unknowingly flicked the release valve. That night, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that he was watching me. Every creak and groan in the building sent shivers down my spine. Then, true to form, another letter arrived. This one was shorter, but no less disturbing. "Dear," it started, "I want to apologize for shouting at you earlier. I let my anger get the better of me, and I'm sorry about that, but I can't help but get frustrated at your behavior. I get that you're not interested in me, and that you don't want to be my friend, even if I do find it strange. You're aware of my feelings on this, so I won't repeat them. However, when someone is trying to help you, it is good manners to accept it, or at the very least, be grateful. Again, I'm sorry, and I realize I need to think about the way I acted and will try not to do it again. By the way, this is how adults deal with awkward situations. They don't pretend they never happened. I hope you accept my apology and the little bit of advice I gave you." The audacity of this guy. Not only was he doubling down on his nice guy facade, but he had the gall to offer me unsolicited advice on etiquette. He was gaslighting me, making me feel like I was the problem for not graciously accepting his help, which was nothing more than a veiled attempt to manipulate me. The thinly veiled insults, dripping with condescension, made my blood boil. At this point, I was past feeling sorry for him. I was scared. My instinct screamed, "Get out." But I couldn't just pack up and leave. Moving is expensive, and I wasn't in a position to just break my lease and start over. I thought about confronting him, trying to reason with him one last time. But what good would that do? Every interaction only seemed to escalate the situation. He was clearly fixated on this twisted narrative he had constructed about us, and I wasn't going to be able to talk him out of it. I felt trapped, Like a fly caught in a spider's web, the more I struggled, the more entangled I became. I needed help, but who would understand? Who would take me seriously? This wasn't like in the movies, where a handsome detective sweeps in and saves the day. Finally, I decided to do something I had always been hesitant about. I called my brother. Now, my brother is a few years older, and let's just say he has a way of handling things that doesn't always involve gentle words. I knew telling him about this situation would be like opening Pandora's box. He wouldn't sit idly by while I was being harassed. "Don't worry, little sis," he said, his voice laced with that big brother protectiveness. "I'll take care of it." My brother, ever the man of action, got in touch with some of our mutual friends and tracked down my neighbor's Facebook profile. Then, he did what any protective older brother might do. He sent him a message. "You need to leave my sister alone. You are creeping her out. If you don't, there will be consequences," he wrote. Now, I'm not usually one for confrontation, so part of me cringed when I found out what my brother had done. But another part of me felt relieved. Maybe this would be the wake-up call he needed. Maybe a little dose of fear would do the trick. It turned out, my brother's message did get a reaction, and not the one we had hoped for. I was coming home from a Friday night out, feeling good and carefree. But as I entered the hallway, I spotted him, standing there like he'd been waiting for me. He was angry. "I don't appreciate getting threatening messages from your brother," he snarled, his voice shaking with indignation. I didn't know he sent anything," I stammered, taken aback by his aggressive tone. "What did he say?" "He told me to leave you alone," he spat. "Why can't you just tell me these things yourself? Why can't you at least talk to me? I just don't understand you." I tried to reason with him. "Look, I'm sorry about the messages, I didn't know he was going to do that," I said, my voice trembling. "But I have told you I don't want you to contact me. And yet you keep sending me these weird letters." I think he was just worried about me. He went on a tirade, his voice rising, his face turning red. He ranted about how he was just trying to be nice, and how I was misunderstanding his intentions. It was the same old song and dance, only this time, there was a menacing undertone to his words. The anger simmering beneath the surface was palpable. He started shouting again, questioning my motives and implying that I had somehow wronged him by not reciprocating his feelings. Then he uttered a word that sent chills down my spine, SUT. That's when something inside me snapped. The fear, the confusion, the guilt, it all coalesced into a single, fiery point of anger. "FK this," I retorted, my voice shaking with both fear and fury. "I'm not listening to you anymore. Leave me alone." I spun on my heel and marched toward my apartment, ignoring his half-hearted attempt at an apology. The word hung in the air, thick and suffocating, like a poisonous gas. I was done. I was done feeling afraid, done with the letters, done with his pathetic attempts to control me. I called my brother, my voice laced with anger and a touch of hysteria. "I need to get out of here," I choked out between sobs. "This isn't just some silly crush anymore. He's scary, and I don't feel safe in my own home." This time, my brother's response was different. The playful teasing, the big brother tough guy act, it was gone. Replaced by a somber realization that this situation had spun far out of control. We discussed options, trying to figure out a plan that wouldn't leave me financially crippled but would get me away from my neighbor. My brother offered to help me find a new place, even offered to help me with the cost of breaking my lease. He also suggested I talk to our parents. Talking to our parents was my last resort. I knew they'd be worried sick and probably blame themselves for not being more present. They had enough on their plate without having to deal with my drama. But my brother insisted. "They need to know what's going on," he urged. "They love you, and they would want to help." So, reluctantly, I told my parents about everything. About the awkward encounter, the relentless pursuit, the increasingly creepy letters, the angry outbursts, and the horrible insults. As expected, their reactions were a mix of shock, concern, and frustration. They bombarded me with questions. "Why didn't you tell us sooner? What did he say to you? What did you do?" They oscillated between wanting to rush over and confront my neighbor themselves and urging me to get out of that building as quickly as possible. But as much as they wanted to fix everything, they lived a few hours away, and their intervention wouldn't change the fact that I was living a few feet away from someone who was making me feel increasingly unsafe. The truth was, I felt like I had made a mistake, a series of mistakes, that had led me to this point. And I didn't know how to fix it. I was overwhelmed by shame, guilt, and fear. It felt like everyone had an opinion on what I should have done differently. It was my fault for not being clear enough. My fault for being too nice. My fault for not trusting my instincts sooner. My fault for putting myself in a vulnerable position in the first place. The weight of their judgment, combined with the terror of my neighbor's actions, crushed me. My anxieties amplified, making it impossible to sleep, impossible to focus, impossible to escape the feeling that I was living in a real-life horror movie. One night, as I lay awake in bed, every little noise sending shivers down my spine, I came to a realization: I couldn't keep living like this. The constant fear, the feeling of being watched, the dread of running into him in the hallway, it was consuming me. I needed to take control of the situation before I completely unraveled. The next morning, I did something I never thought I would have the courage to do. I went to the police. Now, I'm not talking about calling 911 because someone's breaking down my door. I'm talking about walking into the police station, filled with imposing officers, and admitting that I was scared of my neighbor, that he was making me feel threatened. It felt like a huge step, like admitting defeat. I expected judgment, skepticism, even ridicule. After all, what hard evidence did I have? A few creepy letters, a shouting match in the hallway, an off-color insult muttered in a fit of rage. It all felt so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. To my surprise, the police were incredibly understanding. I explained everything, from that first drunken encounter to the latest letter, trying to convey the escalating creepiness of his behavior. I showed him the letters, his persistent messages on Facebook, and recounted the awkward encounters in the hallway. I shared the growing sense of dread that had taken root in my stomach. The officer listened patiently, nodding empathetically as I poured out my story. "You've done the right thing by coming to us," she assured me, her voice calm and reassuring. "We take these situations very seriously. No one should feel unsafe in their own home." The police took down all the details and filed a report. They offered to contact my neighbor, but I realized I didn't have his number. He'd never called me. It was always me trying to evade him. They said they would go over to the building and speak with him. It wasn't a restraining order, not yet. No charges were filed, no arrests were made. But the fact that there was an official record of his behavior, that someone in a position of authority was now aware of what was happening, gave me a tiny sliver of hope. Leaving the police station, I felt lighter, the knot in my stomach loosening for the first time in days. For once, I didn't have to carry this burden alone. Unfortunately, this sense of relief was short-lived. Talking to the police hadn't magically resolved the situation. It was like throwing a pebble into a pond. It created ripples, but it didn't change the course of the stream. The weekend after I reported the incidents to the police, I was at my parents' house. My dad took me to lunch, trying to distract me with stories of his latest woodworking projects and asking about my job. But underneath his cheerful facade, I could sense his concern. On my way back to the city, I stopped by my apartment to grab some things. I knew there was a possibility of running into him, but I convinced myself that if we did cross paths, I'd simply nod politely and continue on my way. No need to engage, no need to rehash anything. I just wanted to get in and out as quickly as possible. As I approached my apartment door, I heard footsteps. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Please don't be him, please don't be him, but fate had other plans. He was standing at the end of the hallway, his arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. My heart skipped a beat, my breath catching in my throat. He spoke first. "I hear you had a little chat with the police," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. My mind raced, desperately trying to formulate a response, but my tongue felt thick and heavy. I felt like a deer caught in the headlights, paralyzed by fear and indecision. "Yeah, well," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. I was feeling uncomfortable. I had to do something. I desperately wanted to avoid a confrontation, especially now that I knew the police were involved. I hoped that perhaps mentioning the police would be enough to deter him. Instead of backing off, he seemed to savor this new development. "Come on, there was no need for all that," he scoffed, dismissing my concerns as if they were frivolous and unnecessary. He moved closer, closing the distance between us. I felt trapped, the hallway walls seeming to close in on me. He continued his rant, his voice low and menacing. "You really shouldn't have slept with me if you didn't want anything more," he hissed, his eyes boring into mine. "Now look at the mess you've created." It was a blatant attempt to shift the blame onto me, to make me feel responsible for his unsettling behavior. His words echoed the sentiments in his letter, the manipulative tactic of blaming the victim. He was trying to control the narrative, to paint me as the villain in his story. "You're right," I conceded, my voice trembling. "I shouldn't have slept with you. But you know what? What's done is done. I've tried to make it clear that I'm not interested, and you need to respect that." He laughed, a mirthless sound that scraped against my nerves. "Respect? You called the cops on me. Doesn't sound very respectful to me." He was toying with me, like a cat with a mouse. "That's because you've been making me feel unsafe." My voice rose, my fear morphing into anger. The constant letters, the lurking on my Facebook page, the blowing up at me in the hallway, the name calling. It's creepy and unsettling, and I'm not going to put up with it any longer. He leaned in close, his breath hot on my face. "You need to be careful," he warned, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Then he was gone, disappearing into his apartment as quickly as he had appeared. My heart pounded in my chest, my knees trembling. My carefully constructed facade of bravery crumbled, replaced by the chilling realization that he wasn't going to back down. He was escalating the situation, taking things to a whole new level of crazy. I grabbed my things, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grip the bag. I raced out of the building, the echoing sound of his laughter ringing in my ears. I felt hunted, like a prey animal desperately trying to escape the clutches of a predator. I knew I couldn't stay there. The illusion of safety, the comfort of my own home, it was gone. He had shattered it, piece by piece, with his manipulative letters, his public outbursts, and his veiled threats. My apartment was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a cage, and I was trapped inside with a madman. That night, I went to my brother's place. The familiar surroundings, the comforting presence of my sibling, offered a temporary sense of security. But the fear remained, a constant hum beneath the surface of my forced cheerfulness. We went over my options, again, the same conversations looping in my mind. I couldn't afford to break my lease, not without draining my savings and jeopardizing my financial stability. Moving back in with my parents was a possibility, but it felt like admitting defeat, like allowing him to win. Then, an idea struck me. The police report, the conversation with the officer, maybe that was the key. I had hesitated to pursue a restraining order, fearing it would be seen as an overreaction. But after that encounter in the hallway, after his thinly veiled threats, I knew I needed more than a polite conversation from a police officer. I needed legal protection. I went back to the police station, armed with a newfound resolve. I explained everything, the confrontation in the hallway, the thinly veiled threats, the escalating fear. This time, there was no hesitation. The officers sprang into action, the wheels of justice finally turning in my favor. I was granted a temporary injunction, a legal shield against my stalker. He was served with the papers, ordered to stay away from me, forbidden from contacting me. The invisible cage that had trapped me within the walls of my apartment began to crumble. Then came the hearing, a tense courtroom drama where my stalker attempted to downplay his actions, painting himself as the victim of a misunderstanding. But the evidence spoke for itself. The judge saw through his charade, his manipulative tactics, and the escalating nature of his behavior. A final injunction was issued, a restraining order putting a legal barrier between me and my tormentor. He was forbidden from coming within a certain distance of me, prohibited from contacting me directly or indirectly. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't over, not entirely, but it was a start. A step towards regaining control, towards reclaiming my sense of safety and security. The injunction had an unexpected benefit. It gave me the legal grounds to break my lease without the crippling financial penalties. My landlord, initially hesitant, understood the severity of the situation once the restraining order was in place. With my newfound legal freedom and my brother's support, I found a new apartment in a different part of the city. It wasn't perfect, but it was a fresh start, a chance to leave the nightmare behind. Moving was cathartic, a symbolic act of cleansing and renewal. I packed up my belongings, carefully sifting through the remnants of my former life. Every box I sealed, every piece of furniture I hauled out of my old apartment, felt like shedding a layer of fear and anxiety. The moment I turned in my keys, the weight of the past few months seemed to evaporate. I was free. The experience, though harrowing, taught me a valuable lesson. To trust my gut, to stand up for myself, and to never, ever doubt my right to feel safe. It taught me that it's okay to ask for help, to lean on loved ones, and to rely on the systems in place to protect those who are vulnerable. If there's one piece of advice I could offer to anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation, it's this: don't let fear paralyze you. You are not alone. Trust your instincts, reach out for help, and remember, you are stronger than you think.